Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session of JSTOR Access in Prison's Second Chance Chats, where every Wednesday in April, we examine an issue in education, prisons, and we talk with people impacted by different facets of the criminal legal system. My name is Stacy Burnett. I manage the JSTOR Access in Prison program. Behind the scenes, Kimberly Letts and Junie Ahari are making sure everything runs smoothly. Next week, we will examine disabilities that impact access to education inside prisons, and we'll close the month live from inside a Maine prison to discuss how people who are incarcerated are leveraging technology to make the world a better place. So people inside prisons can do remarkable things while they're incarcerated and after they leave. I'm really excited about today's guests. They are going to discuss the challenges they experienced during reentry, including what it was like to get back onto a college campus. Our first guest, Keri Blakinger, is the first formerly incarcerated journalist hired by the Marshall Project. She's worked for the Ithaca Times, the New York Daily News, Houston Chronicle, and now she is covering criminal justice issues at the LA Times. She's the author of Corrections in Ink, which chronicles her journey through the New York State prison system, and she finished Cornell University after her release. Next, we have an internationally recognized expert on drugs, jails, and prisons, Morgan Godvin. At JSTOR Daily, she is the engagement editor assigned to the American Prison Newspapers collection, a primary source archive of newspapers produced by and for incarcerated people in prisons nationwide. They begin in the 19th century and go to the present day. They're digitized and hosted online, and they are open access by Reveal Digital. In 2021, Morgan graduated summa cum laude from the Oregon Health and Science University and Portland State University Joint School of Public Health. She's an alumna of the 21-22 Bard Prison Initiative Public Health Fellowship, a founding member of a consortium of formerly incarcerated content creators known as Prison TikTokers. Morgan often finds herself occupying the liminal space between media, social media, and academia. Formerly incarcerated, she served 5 years between Oregon jails and a California federal prison. Thank you, Morgan. Next, we have Caits Meissner, the Director of Prison and Justice Writing at PEN America. She edited The Sentences That Create Us, Crafting a Writer's Life in Prison, of which the Mellon Foundation funded 75,000 copies to reach readers in United States prisons, absolutely free of charge. Her poems, comics, nonfiction, and curation have appeared in The Creative Independent, The Rumpus, Pank, Harper's Bazaar, Android Literary Hub, Split This Rock, Oprah Daily. The list is very long. Her latest project is Flowers for Linda, a new audio zine. It's a podcast, Kate, about creative relationships, giving the living their flowers and the surprising lessons of grief. As a quick side note, the Access in Prison project is publishing an essay every day this month from someone currently or formerly incarcerated. And I want you to know, Kate, that I chose today's post from Jonathan Wren because of the theme of grief. And I just kind of like how it complemented what was in your bio. And it also kind of exemplifies your work, how it bridges the gap between what happens inside and outside. And the book, The Sentences That Create Us, encourages people to express themselves in writing, which is a critical skill for success in college and life. And next, we have Olga Milman. Olga is a dedicated education advocate and nonprofit professional with over 2 decades of experience in IT. She began her career as an international IT executive where she served in multiple capacities, including director of special projects. Excuse me. However, Olga's passion for education led her to switch careers in 2019 when she realized the inadequacy of the current educational system in serving vulnerable communities. Since then, she's worked tirelessly in the nonprofit sector to provide pathways to higher education with a focus on social support systems and trauma-informed principles. She's tutored and planned reentry education and career paths for citizens returning to the community. As the Associate Director of Project Impact at BMCC, Olga continues to align with her mission to cultivate college access programs that empower the next generation of leadership by ensuring that BIPOC, first-gen impacted, and students with disabilities have the necessary tools and critical supports to complete their college degrees. She firmly believes that education is the most powerful tool to combat systemic oppression. She has a BS in computer science and an MBA from Moscow State University and is committed to continuing her own education and is going to go get an EDD in the near future. Her unwavering commitment to serving vulnerable communities are what drive her work, and she hopes to inspire others by being here today in the fight for educational equity. I feel like we could spend the whole time just talking about the really cool stuff everyone on this call is working on. I'm inspired already and no one said a word. Before we dive in though, a quick review that this is an informal chat. We strive to use people-centered language. It's perfectly okay if we don't get it right 100% of the time. And for the audience, if you have questions, please ask them throughout the chat. We'll be monitoring them throughout and we'll incorporate your feedback and questions into the discussion. And with that, I'd like to start with Keri. So Keri, you were a student before you went to prison, and I'm really curious about that journey for you. Like, when did you decide to go back? What made you decide to go back? And what did you think it would be like versus what actually happened?
I mean, I think I'd always wanted to go back. I wanted to finish school for probably a lot of the like wrong reasons, really. You know, growing up, I think my mom was a teacher and I'd been taught to value education, but not just for like the learning or the opportunities, but you know, I think it was just a mark of acceptability in her book, and or a mark of respectability rather. And that was such a measuring stick for my life when I'd been using that it was like, as long as I could manage to not get kicked out of college, I was okay. Like things would be okay in the end and I wasn't too bad off. So I think it had been something I used to justify a lot of the things I did when I was, you know, actively using in a very destructive way. And when I got out, I think I felt like a lot of it was that I felt like, you know, this is part of what I needed to do as redemption, but not in a sort of like positive sense, you know, like this was how I would, you know, this piece of paper is what would make me whole, that sort of thing. Fortunately, it, you know, it actually was a useful thing to want, even if I wanted it for the wrong reasons. And, you know, I was also very close to finishing. So I only had two or three classes left when I got out. So I think it also would have just felt kind of inane not to try to finish at that point. But it did take a little bit because when I got out, I was still suspended at that point, and I had to apply for readmission, and they let me in with the condition that I not be on campus. So I did my last couple classes either as an independent study, meeting up off campus, or one I did online. And yeah, I don't know. That's that. I don't know.
So you were doing online pre-COVID, before it was trendy, before it was a thing.
Yes. Yes, I was. I mean, because this was in like 2014, I guess. So yeah, they still use Whiteboard. That was such an awful app. I hated that so fucking much. But yeah, it was, you know, I mean, I probably would have gotten more out of that class in person, but the last class was about prisons. And I remember the teacher later told me that she'd been worried when she saw that I signed up, because she was like, oh, she's not going to take this seriously. She's just going to think like she's been there. She doesn't need to do anything. And I was, in fact, so incredibly nervous about finishing, like after having been not in the mix and, you know, doing fuck all in prison for 2 years, that I did all of the reading before the class started, which I did not remember that I did that. She reminded me of that later.
So they would allow you to take the classes, but they wouldn't welcome you on campus.
Yeah, and the distinction here is that Cornell was willing to let me back in, but Cornell police was not willing to let me back on campus. So it was actually the cops that wouldn't let me on campus, not necessarily the university. Because Cornell police sort of exists in this gray area where they are cops with guns and shit, but they say that since they are affiliated with Cornell, which is a partially private, partially public university, they believe they're not subject to basically any of the transparency or records requests that any other policing agency would be. So makes it really hard to know, I don't know, to know anything about their decisions or what that conversation looked like or any of that. But yes, it was police specifically that prevented me from being back on campus. I eventually applied to be allowed back on campus after I had finished all my coursework and, was only trying to get back on for graduation. And I got like, I don't know, 24 people to write character references, and they, let me back on campus, which is in retrospect, like kind of wild that I had to do all that. I mean, not like I'm saying I like got out and wanted everything handed to me or whatever, but like, it's kind of crazy that like I finished prison, I finished parole, like this is what, like, I'm supposed to have been like rehabilitated. Like I did my time, I paid for the crime, whatever. And then also got back into Cornell, proved to Cornell that like I was adequately rehabilitated to be among their student body. And then still had to go beyond that to get back on campus. And I mean, obviously it all worked out, but it's like, it's just kind of wild because I think it says a lot about what, what we really mean when, when we talk about, paying your, paying your dues or doing your time. It's just obviously there's always more. It just never ends.
Wow, thank you for that. I didn't know that part. I had always conflated that it was the college and I didn't know about the public safety component to complicating that for you. So Morgan, your experience was a little bit different when you went to college post-release.
Yeah, so, I had gone to community college sporadically during my addiction, mostly because I got like military benefits that paid me to go to school. So, incentive. And so I would take some community college classes. I got my EMT, but that was very hit or miss. I'm getting like mediocre grades stretched across many years of occasional classes. But when I was in prison, I was very naive because I sat in county jail for almost 2 years awaiting sentencing on a federal case. And I was so frustrated with the lack of opportunity in county, the lack of just anything, that I was like, oh, when I get to prison, I'm going to get my bachelor's degree. And I was just like so excited to get to prison and to be able to like, do these things. Like I have an abundance of time, and I'd always sort of meant to get like a college degree, just never quite figured it out. And so I was going to get to prison and get my bachelor's. And then I got to prison and there was nothing. There was like no opportunity to earn a single college credit. Now, had I been a California resident, there was like the governor's board waiver for California students to do correspondence classes. But because I was an Oregon resident, but in a prison in California, because there are no women's federal prisons in the state of Oregon, there was just nothing available to me. And I thought I was going to get out and just like, I don't know, finish my associates at the community college maybe, and then like transfer into a university. And I met someone when I was inside whose doctorate program had been interrupted when she was sentenced to federal prison. And she really encouraged me to go to a 4-year university right out the gate, and that I would qualify for scholarships because it was the cost that I was worried about. And so I got out of prison, and my final year of my prison sentence was at the halfway house, being so I was still technically a Bureau of Prisons inmate, but I'm being supervised at the federal halfway house and able to go to college. And I had to fill out my FAFSA on paper, and no one at the prison would help me at all. I was like, hey, education department, this is theoretically what you're supposed to do. Can I have a FAFSA? Because I'm getting out in 9 months. And they were just like, and so I had to have someone send me in a paper FAFSA, and then I filled it out, sent it off. And this is me just knowing, because thank God I'd gone to community college before and knew that I needed to do that, because there was no structures in place to like facilitate my higher education after release. And then like my week before I got out, I called my best friend on the jail phone, and in this 15-minute phone call, he created an account for me at Portland State University and like registered for my classes and put them on his credit card. And I had to pay him back later. So when I got to the halfway house, I was like, hi, I've already missed the first week of classes. I have these classes at Portland State University. I need to go to these classes, but it's in downtown Portland. So they were like, are you going to do heroin? And I was like, no, I just want to go to school. Finally, at this point, I've been waiting 4.5 years just to go to college. It's all I've been wanting to do. And they gave me permission. And I was able to start at Portland State University just days after my release from prison. And it was so hard. I was not prepared for what I would find coming into a university. I'd never heard of Google Docs. I had no idea how to use the technology, and I'd only been gone 4.5 years, but in 2014 to 2018, the way society used technology changed profoundly. Like, I had never took an Uber before, and so these were all just like new inventions. And culturally, I was just not prepared. I'd never gone to a 4-year university, and I thought that there would be college navigators because I was in prison in California, so I'd heard a lot about Project Rebound and these programs designed to help formerly incarcerated people. And again, me just being super naive, I assumed that Portland State would have them, and there was just nothing. And I struggled to get financial aid because I was starting in the winter term and not the fall. And there was just no one there to help me. And I just remember being so frustrated and just like in tears and crying, and there being really nothing.
So Olga, I see your whole posture change. I feel like you're vibrating to comment. Before you get started, I just want to volunteer that I had only taken college in prison. And when I enrolled in college on the outside, my first day was such a disaster because like I didn't know I had to go get my own books. Like in prison, they do, when you take a college class in prison, everything is like packaged up for you, nice and pretty. And they even at Bard Prison Initiative, they gave us a folder. Like it was, everything fit in there, all nice and pretty. They organized it for us. And then I got to school and I was like, what? Like the syllabus? Like how come where is it? And I couldn't use the LMS. It was really difficult. So Olga, this is where your magic happens. Tell us a bit about what you do.
So now with Project Impact at Borough of Manhattan Community College, we're kind of an innovative program because we specifically service and support people who have been impacted. And we have extended it to say you've been impacted by the government systems. We not only help students who are coming back home from prison, but also family members, first-generation students, immigrants, because that is the population that needs the support the most. We're like one of the largest community colleges campus-wise, and it is so easy to get lost, especially for the students who do not have any prior understanding of going on a blackboard, letting your professor know that you might be late for the class, or if you have a sick note, or something happened, or you need to go to court. Like all of these simple things that person can take for granted, or if let's say all of these college scholarship students who come into colleges who already have all of that knowledge, who have access to that knowledge in high schools, our population doesn't have that access. So we're like working with summer bridge program to acclimate students so they don't fail, they don't get lost during the first semester, where you get like the basic Google Docs skill. You get the knowledge that you have to participate in discussion chat on the Blackboard. This is how you schedule your one-on-one with professor on Zoom. Like the total ethics of attending college, which a person would not normally have. And which is unfair. I'm a big And unfair part is that the Macaulay students, the students who are already coming with A+ grades, with 4.0 great SAT scores, they have that. And the population who really needs it does not have access. And Stacy and I usually, like I say, it's amazing when I see a young kid, like my generation, we first learned the computers and then the cell phones came. So to me, I'm celebrating 4 years at home today, like knowing, seeing a young kid who tell, like, who is using the phone and showing me what to do with the phone, and then they don't know how to do Microsoft Word because their school did not have access to that. But like, we automatically assume that, oh, if you're so advanced with the phone, you know everything else. You're muted. You're on mute. The most famous phrase in 2021.
We're in 2023 now. Anyway, Keri, when you were trying to get back into Cornell, did you have to wait until after you left, or could that process begin before you left? And then, if you feel comfortable, your life is literally an open book, but like, how did you handle the financial aid part? Like, Morgan had someone to help put it on their credit card. Like, that's not the reality for the millions of people who are in jails and prisons. Like, how did you, if you feel comfortable, how did you navigate that?
So in terms of getting back in, I could not start before I left because I was still suspended for like X number of years to indefinitely, and I forget, like 4 years to indefinitely, 3, like I don't know. It was
Or to life,
what?
the famous Rockefeller law when people got like
Yeah,
1 to life.
exactly. Yep. Yeah. And so whatever it was though, it didn't, the suspension, the minimum term of the suspension didn't run out until 2 years after I got out. So I was not able to start trying to get back in until, you know, significantly after I was out. And in terms of paying for it, I think I only had like one class that I had to pay for because some of the things were incomplete that needed to be finished. And I think one of the independent studies had technically been like started and then left as an incomplete when I got arrested. So it was actually only one class that that I needed to pay for. But yeah, so I didn't do anything with financial aid.
Can I just say that like my student loans defaulted when I was in prison, and that was a huge issue. Like, and I know a lot of people struggle with this. So I had like almost $20,000 in student loans already when I was in jail and prison, and so that was just accruing interest and defaulting. But I knew that those being in default were going to impact my ability to further my education. And I still had a little bit of money in savings. My mom had passed away shortly before I got arrested, and I had gotten like a life insurance check. So I got out with $12,000 in savings, and that was it. That is all I had to my name. I had nowhere to live. I didn't have any property. I didn't have any surviving family really, but I had $12,000 in my bank account. But I made sure to get my student loans out of default starting 9 months before my release, making minimum payments through someone I had signed power of attorney over, just to be able to do that. Because, like, you know, my friend was able to put the 1 class or 2 classes on his credit card when I was a non-degree seeking student, but that gave me that 3-month buffer to then actually tap back into financial aid. And the state of Oregon was offering grants and stuff. So then after that first quarter where I was just taking 2 classes as a non-degree seeking student, by the spring I was fully eligible for financial aid again, but only because I had the privilege and ability to get my student loans out of default and had the privilege and ability to file my FAFSA on paper. None of those things were built into the prison system. But then I was able to become a full-time student starting the first full quarter after my release at no cost to me because I took out more student loans.
So So in the question section, someone is asking about how to continue college after release. Like they don't have a clear way to advise people who want to continue their college education when they leave. Like, is there a place that they can go? They're telling the advice that students are being given is get in touch with the college where you want to go. So I know in your role, Olga, you talk to a lot of colleges, not just the one where you happen to work. What is the guidance? What's happening? What do you see as a trend as someone on the field trying to service people coming back from jails and prisons?
Well, at BMCC, they automatically refer to our program. And we work with organizations with CBO who service people coming home from prisons and service people who are still in prison, like Fortune, like Orphan Association. So, but I do find one of the major obstacles, and we are in a wonderful state of New York with the addition of TAP, and now TAP is available, and Excelsior TAP is available, but one of the major problems is that people went to college before and flanked out. And if it's a CUNY college, so we cannot accept them. But if they went to some other college outside of CUNY SUNY system, if they have a balance, it doesn't matter because they still will be able to get their transcripts. Because we do have that law in New York that it's, you know, if you're in default, you still will get your transcripts. But it's one of the major obstacles is that debt to college, not even the student loan, when you already like owe them and the federal aid or state aid didn't cover it. That's one of the major obstacles that we have, clearing the pathway for students to come back to school.
So we have, thank you for that. So there's no like clear pipeline where people can go and say, I want to go to school, who can connect me? There's no, like it's still, that burden is still ostensibly placed on the student. Thank you for that. So Keri, there are some questions about your horticulture experience, your horticulture education when you were inside. And I think that this is a great way to bring Caits into the conversation about ways that people get different types of education and what they can do that is helpful when they leave versus maybe what's less helpful. I think it's great that you took horticulture and you can't keep your plants alive.
Right, it was clearly a very helpful educational experience. So wait, what are the questions about horticulture? Because I can't answer them. Clearly, I can't keep a fucking plant alive. These are all fake. This is what I learned from horticulture. Because actually, when I started the class, it was right before Christmas, and they had us making wreaths. So I learned about fake plants. I didn't learn anything about real ones. I also learned how to smuggle crosswords into a classroom, which pissed me off so much. What?
Very useful skills.
I know, right? It's so ridiculous though, because you couldn't bring a book or anything with you into those vocational classrooms. And, you know, there's only so much weeding you can do in a fucking greenhouse in like December, you know? And so people would sleep under the benches or like lick the plants to try to get high or whatever. And I wanted to do crosswords. So like you would get searched going in and, you know, I had to fucking rip pages out of a crosswords book and like smuggle them in and like under in my shoe or in my underwear, depending. So yeah, that's what I learned from horticulture.
Wow. I knew about the licking of the plants. I did not know about smuggling crosswords. That's a new one. So how many hours a day were you in horticulture?
I mean, it was like a 3-hour module in the morning. You know, and obviously when I tell this story, I feel like one of the takeaways is that you could interpret that I'm saying that, you know, prison vocational classes are bad, and that's obviously not what I'm saying. But I just think that prisons shouldn't be patting themselves on the back for offering vocational classes when they are fucking useless. Like I was never going to be going into horticulture, but yet I was required to do a class, and they were all honestly just completely going to be useless to me because, I mean, what were the options? There was like janitorial, like I don't know how much of a class that really required. Like, was that really a class? You know, and then the cosmetics one, which like, cool, that's probably useful to people, but just not my jam, clearly. And then what else? Oh, there was the business class, which you're using computers that are not connected to the internet, and we're running like Windows 95 in 2011 when I was there. So like, you're not teaching people useful skills unless the only skill they needed was to learn how to type, in which case, yes, like you could practice typing. And I just played like fucking typing games from the 90s. Like I literally played that Mario Brothers typing game in prison. That's what I did. And I learned how to make paper airplanes when I was in the business class too. Because I was also in the business class at one point. But anyways, you know, just saying, like, there were options for vocational classes, but they were clearly not going to be useful to me or to a number of the people there. So I just don't think that prisons should get some sort of, you know, pat on the back for offering vocational programs when they aren't actually helpful to your life afterwards, and all they're doing is just managing to succeed in keeping you busy and making it look like you've done something to change to get out.
Yeah.
So Caits, I think that this is a great time for you to introduce us all to the work that you're doing and the value that it brings to the people who PEN America serves. So if you could bring us into the conversation a little bit about what you do and what you see and what the impact is.
Happy to. Good to see you, Stacy, Morgan, Keri. Nice to meet you, Olga. Hi, whoever is out there on this. Apologies, there's some construction outside my window, so hopefully it won't be too annoying, the beeps, and I think there might be some sewage happening out there if you saw me go. I'm struggling through today, but so at PEN America, we have a 5-decade running program that has historically worked with writers in the capacity of awarding quality writing through our Prison Writing Awards program, as well as mentorships through the walls that work through the mail on an individual basis, one-to-one, and a Writing for Justice fellowship that we held for 3 years that was looking at exposing critical issues connected to mass incarceration. Over the past couple of years, and I took over leadership about 5 years ago, we've been able to really synthesize what people have been asking for through the walls, and just, you know, fist bump to Keri, who's interviewed in the book, among 50 contributors. And this is what I want to focus the energy. It's what you invited me to talk about. So I'll give a little context of the book. The Sentences That Create Us: Crafting a Writer's Life in Prison is a book that really, that I edited and had a great time doing so. What a challenge. With writers both formerly incarcerated, currently incarcerated, and people, allies in the field, allies and comrades in the field who are connected to the work and had something to offer. And at first, the book was launching from an old resource we had called the Handbook for Writers in Prison, which was like a nice writing guide primer. I was very proud that, you know, PEN America had sent it to hundreds of people for free, thousands of people for free over the years. I used to get it for students when I taught inside prisons. I'm a writer, obviously, outside of an artist outside of my role at PEN. But when I came in, I said, this book doesn't address anything about writing in prison. And I started to look at the mail we were getting, and people were asking, how do I copyright my work? How do I get published? What does even being a writer really mean? You know, there's all this mythology around, you know, well, when I just blow up like Stephen King. And I was like, hate to tell you, most people aren't going to have that. But then also understanding what people needed writing skills for, which extended far beyond, you know, an interest in creative writing, and even beyond self-expression, but practicalities, legal work, family connection, et cetera, et cetera. And as Keri was just talking about, I started to understand too. Actually, before I came to PEN, I went on a book tour of my own and centered it around prisons because that was my work. And I wasn't that excited about reading to like 5 people in a library who came to see me. So I would go try to do something else that was meaningful alongside it. And I really understood for the first time, I think, that in New York City, all the prisons surrounding New York City, which is where I was teaching in and around New York City, are stacked. They're turning volunteers away because there's so much interest in artists and educators, coming into the field. But when you get out into Gatesville, Texas, with 6 prisons on the Strip, there's nobody's coming in. The whole community's employed by the prison. There's nobody interested in coming in to do this work. So I started to realize that there are a tremendous amount of programming deserts across the country in prisons. So not only is college not available, not only is vocational not available, but there's nothing in many places. And as Keri's saying, vocational isn't enough and often isn't up to par and often is sort of a joke. So the resource was really created looking to meet the needs of a wide spectrum of people who are interested in pursuing the capital W of writing. I want to be a writer. What does that mean? To people who are looking at, how do I write a more effective grievance? How do I, up my literacy skills? How do I get myself out of prison, really? And there's plenty of stories of how writing really helped people come home from prison or helped other people get other people out of prison across the book. So I think what really drove me and the folks who agreed to write it was the idea that this was a book that was addressing this huge amount of unanswered questions in lieu of, in some ways, programming or college degrees. And not that a book can do that solely, but what we were looking at, what gaps can we really fill? I'm not sure if that answered the question.
Oh no, like I'm in rapt attention and I can't find the unmute button. So that really speaks to campus readiness, right? So Keri's experience of, risking her freedom with little freedom inside jail and prison to smuggle a crossword puzzle for some like mental stimulation, right? And then versus quality time spent looking at like, how can I become a writer with a capital W? Like when people come home, that is a skill that they carry with them, right? And Olga, oh no, go Caits.
There's one thing I wanted to pop in. Sorry, Stacy, that you just reminded me, and then I'll zip it up again and pass it to Olga. But I also think that what I was hearing is there was a lack of materials that showed it was possible for people. And one of the biggest repeated feedback I get from the book is, these are people who've been through my experience, who've done amazing things, and are detailing how they've done it. I was on the verge of giving up, and now I have hope again. And so I think even a resource like this in a college classroom in prison is meaningful, because it's not just, we're reading about somebody who's dead, or we're reading some contemporary author that doesn't share my experience, but these are incredibly intelligent, incredibly resourceful, creative people who are giving me not just a key to how to move my life forward in this regard, but also have really made something of their lives. And there's like a renewed hope in that as well.
Yeah, so the second chance essays that we're working on, which is also what made me want to reach out to you about doing this with us, is that 2 people out of this random smattering of 300 people, which are hard enough to reach on the inside, right? They referenced your book, and like that's life changing, and sometimes like what's happening outside the classroom is really critical to set the preconditions for a mindset shift, so people even think that education is for them, right? And I just think that sometimes those informal spaces are where a lot of education happens, and that informal education also is what helps people get to the point where when they want to go home, or Olga's helping them get situated, like that skill is critical then, right? So along those lines, Morgan, when you were like, I can just picture you all Pollyanna, like, I'm gonna get my degree. What was that like when you couldn't? And I think that it's great that you're such an accomplished writer yourself and you work in editing now. Like, did any of that start on the inside?
Yeah. So, right before my sentencing, I got a letter from Senator Jeff Merkley, because I'd like wrote to all my senators complaining about the fact there was no education available to me. And and Senator Merkley was just like, oh, well, actually, you're eligible for a Pell Grant. You haven't been sentenced yet. You're an and he was right, but it was too late. I'd already spent 2 years in jail, unsentenced, having been eligible for a Pell Grant that whole time, but just not having known it. And even if I had known it, I would have had to find a mail-based correspondence class because there's no way in hell they would have given me technology access. So I probably wouldn't have been able to take advantage of that anyway. But I get to prison, very Pollyanna, as you said, and then just like quickly realize that there's actually not going to be formal educational opportunities available to me, but the informal, and how I wish I had that book when I was inside. I remember finding Stephen King's On Writing in the prison library and just having it just like change my mind, because it was my ability to write. And I had taken writing 101 at community college to get my, EMT license or whatever, but I never considered myself a writer or academically inclined whatsoever. But it was my prison emails that I was sending out on core links, where people, on my contact list first started commenting on my writing. And then someone at Families Against Mandatory Minimum Sentences connected me with the Marshall Project, and they were going to publish one of my essays for Life Inside while I was still in prison. And that was just such a pivotal moment in my life, because before that, I lived in pretty bad poverty most of my life. So my vision of what a successful life after prison was like, okay, as long as I, don't end up shooting heroin again, I'll get some job, I'll make $20 an hour. That's a lot of money. And I'll be, that's success. But it had just been limited by my past life experiences, which had been limited by addiction. And so really trying to envision what do you want to do in your life? What does success look like? What is fulfilling? That really changed when I had that essay published in the Marshall Project. When you're so used to your voice being silenced and just feeling like society has shut you away and forgotten about you, to be able to wake up that day and say oh, I'm a published writer, Vice and the Marshall Project published something I wrote, and then trying to integrate that into my identity, that, oh, am I a writer now? What does it mean to be a writer? And really trying to reconcile with that. And that was just weeks before my release that was published. And so I was able to just sort of start to shift my perception of myself and integrate new aspects into my identity. I am more than what I was before. I am changing. I am growing. I'm a writer. And it took me a while to say it without a question mark at the end. But eventually I was able to. And so I got out and I submitted an opinion piece to the Oregonian, to our mainstream paper here, and they published it. And so I was 2 for 2. I'd pitched 2 things in my life and had 2 things be published, which I was like, oh, okay, I'm a writer. I'm a writer. And I would have to, say it. And I just kept publishing freelance while working on my bachelor's in public health and Spanish, because another thing, I couldn't do any college classes in prison, but I was surrounded by people speaking Spanish. And so I did an immersion. And so I learned Spanish. I did this. But mostly I started helping people write. Even though I was not a trained writer myself, the ability for grievances, for medical request forms, for getting your basic needs met, we really don't understand how important it is to be able to convey things succinctly and clearly. And especially because I had that paramedic prerequisite background from community college, I could really help with medical lingo. And writing things in a way that the triage nurse wouldn't just crumple it up and throw it away. Writing people's medical request forms in a way that could get them medical attention. And then I just realized the power of being able to communicate in that way and being able to lift up others to communicate in that way. And so I would tutor people and try to help them beef up their writing skills. And then after release, I was able to, everybody's like, don't, writing's not a career. Don't get a career in journalism. It's a dying industry and this and that. And I didn't seek it out. I got a degree in public health, but I just kept writing and seeing how important it is to like lift up voices. And then right as I was graduating, I saw this job. So it's like American Prison Newspapers Collection. So it's this digitized archive of prison newspapers from like the 19th century through now. And you had to, you know, have journalism experience in academia, and a deep knowledge of prisons. And I'm like, well, here I am. And so I've gotten to sort of continue the same trends that I did in prison, which is lifting other people up, like finding these like buried stories within the like 100 years ago. And what's most tragic is when I look in that archive, like I was working on a second chance essay yesterday, and I found this essay by Eugene Debs, who is this famous socialist activist who ran for prison from the Atlanta penitentiary, where he'd been sentenced for speaking out against World War I. And it reads like it could have been written today. We are saying the same things. We have been imploring prisons to, you know, offer more higher education, pay a minimum wage, pay a living wage so people can support their families despite incarceration. And the through lines through history, so that hurts me, but it's also super powerful. And so I accidentally stumbled into a career in journalism, but sort of not, also sort of history and academia and research. And I just keep sort of clawing forward in the dark and charting a new path. And my life today is so much better than anything I possibly imagined that a successful life after prison would look like. Like if you, the day before I got out, if you're like, in 5 years, where are you going to be? I never would have guessed here, like on this call, doing this. But it really speaks to the importance of, I mean, education, opportunity. I was afforded privileges that so many people are denied, and I recognize that every day. And really, I mean, just to go back to what Caits is saying, that like the identity of like, I am a writer. And I do lots of other things, but at my core, writing gave me purpose and carried me forward into this life I live today.
So do you think if you didn't get that on writing from Stephen King, and I think that things would have eventually found, you would have found your way here, or was that like the thing for you?
It was someone else suggesting that I write for the Marshall Project. That was really, like, if that had never happened, I couldn't have taken that first step because I didn't feel worthy or capable or able, because, you know, I needed someone else to tell me, your writing is good and you should do this, pitch the Marshall Project. And then I needed to see it. I needed to, like, you know, and a CEO secretly like took me into her office, and she had the internet, and she like showed me, because like when you publish things online when you're incarcerated, you can't see them. Like, what is, someone can like print it out and you'll get it in several days in like a weird printed version, but you don't get to see like the cool layout on the web design page. And so it was really cool that this CEO like showed me my own article on her computer. And that was really what cemented it for me. Like, I saw this tangible evidence of, oh, I can do that. You know, I can do more than just deliver pizzas in my life. Like, I can be a writer. And that's something I'd never even let myself dream. Even after reading the On Writing from Stephen King, I just thought it was sort of novel. Like, I'm reading, I'm like, yeah, this is interesting. Like, you know, going through writing techniques, I'd always sort of like liked the science of writing and the concept and the act of it, but oh, that's not me. But when I saw this tangible manifestation of, no, this is you, look, you published this, you did this, that just fundamentally changed my life. I don't know where I would be today if I hadn't had that opportunity. That was really the moment that set me on the course to be here talking to you today.
That's awesome. I really appreciated that. And I want to dig a little bit at when you were talking about like you didn't see yourself or the confidence. Olga, when people come to you who are leaving prison or who are back in the community, have they had that epiphany moment yet that Morgan was just describing?
Yes, and you know how I am so against that word second chance. I deal with kids in juvenile detention centers who are learning to read and write at the age of 15 when they're getting detained. Why we call it a second chance when the person was never given the first chance? When, especially in New York City with our current mayor, gonna take money away from poor zip codes, give it to the police, take away from the schools, and then we're gonna dish out a little money to some CBOs who will do workforce development. So your mind is preconditioned that the only thing you can do is a little job skill set. And kids do not believe kids from foster care because the parents are in prison, people coming back from prison to the home settings, not believing that they can do it. Because it's preconditioned, like you're a criminal or you are from a poor zip code, so all you can do is a little skill. Not that, some of us love to do little skill, and do the same job every day without any promotion, but there are so many bright people that lack that confidence. And all
So
you need is basically just to, after conversating and explaining and showing that all of it is doable. Heck, we have a student, she's 57.
I love that.
Yep. And I had another student who is at that age walk in and she said, I don't know if I can do it. I said, wait a minute, I'm going to connect you.
So one of the things that made me want to have you on today, Olga, is when we were talking about what it looked like to have a college community on a campus that was welcoming to people who have a history with the system, which legal system it is, what's their need. And when you started telling me about how a person within the mentoring community that you had was like able to celebrate that they were getting off of parole,
Yes.
like, and they had a place for that, and the other people in that room understood the importance of being off paper. What does that do to the culture inside? So like people like Keri, when they come home, it's like, you're not wanted here. We'll take your money for the tuition, but you can't come on campus.
Yeah, you can come on campus, really. That's what the thought was going through my mind. But because you become part of a community, you're like a family, so you're not alone. You don't have to hide the fact that you might have a curfew. So at one of our community meetings, if you people with one person just shared that today is the day I got the paper, I'm no longer on parole, I'll be out for the whole night. And then the conversation kind of went that way because it's a safe space for everyone. And we've heard from a student who was attending, and we do not question which way you have been impacted. Like our director strongly believes that you can reveal it when you are ready, and if you want to, like people have to earn the right to know your story. And he actually called me afterward, and during the meeting, he said, I feel so welcomed and supported. I have a DWI, and I was always so ashamed to talk about it. So that gives you like the sense of belonging, sense that you are not some odd person who no one wants. And at BMCC specifically, it's really like important. We have a chair of human services department, Professor Rose. She's really promoting and supporting organization. In 2 weeks, we're going to the shelter where people who have been released from prison are taking our classes. So we're going there as a mentor. So I think it really depends that you go into college that has that kind of support, which is rare.
Thank you.
The sense of belonging and sense of community, I think it's one of the biggest things, because when you are in prison, you live in the community, you want it or not, and they can move you from F gallery to J, and you think you're now below the grade because the J gallery is bad. So I guess the sense of belonging when you are among people who can relate to your trauma, who can just give you a hug when you need it without telling you, oh yeah, I understand. The empathy instead of sympathy. Did I answer the question?
I remember my first public health class, the professor got up and said, you know, this is a safe space. If you're ever feeling triggered, you can just step out in the hall. You don't need to ask. I maintain a safe space in my classroom. And I laughed out loud. I was like, oh, that's funny. Because I thought she was being sarcastic because I'd never heard that term or that phrase before. And everyone, all these 19-year-olds in my class just like turned to look at me like I'm an awful person. And then I realized like, oh, no, that's sincere. And then I just like saw the disconnect. Like last week, I'm being like shouted at and cussed out by correctional officers. And this week, like the title of a peer-reviewed journal article might trigger me, and I'm in a safe space now and I can step out into the hallway. And just those sort of like cultural differences. But yeah, at Portland State, they did not cultivate a community of belonging. And so I felt so very alone. And then I had an ankle monitor on for 6 months. And like, how do you broach that? Like, it's the middle of summer. I'm wearing shorts in some of my classes. And it's just a whole bunch of people who did not understand, but at times offered sympathy. But every once in a while, you would find the person who had actually been through it before, who got it, or who had that empathy to give. And those would just be so fulfilling, those conversations, those moments. And so I really had to seek them out because it's not the norm. I think most universities do a very poor job of creating, cultivating a culture of belonging.
We usually have a few, like when it's a 4-year college, but they also have an associate's degree program. We have a few within CUNY system. So we have quite a few students who fail within the first semester. Because it's humongous school, it's a 4-year school, they really don't care. You're not prepared 100%, you would fail, and then we have a second chance, what it's called, but it's a second chance. You have a bad GPA.
Mm-hmm. So you do believe in second chances?
Would not take you, yeah. It's called second chance, so you have to write an essay and say like, yes, I did bad in such and such school. Mm-hmm. This is how I'm gonna do better. This is why you can, admit me with 0.7 GPA.
Yeah.
All right.
That is a second chance, right?
Yeah. But
like
having someone to guide you through that process, I think, is really, really important. And most colleges are only now starting to understand that. This is really not just about attracting, but also retention of students.
Yes.
So some parting notes as we're getting ready to go. I'm so grateful everybody here was able to, contribute. There's so much richness and there's so much in this space that we still need to work on and work through. But part of my goal is to demonstrate to colleges and DOCs that there is a need, there is a desire, there are informal and formal spaces that are critical inside that help facilitate that ease of transition to a student on the outside. And if we, there are avenues where we can work together to make those things possible. Everyone on this call is accomplished, talented. If you are comfortable as we exit for people to reach out to you, you can just announce your info, and we also are sending a recording if people want. We can also connect people on this call. You only received a very much a scratch of the surface of what every one of these accomplished, powerful women are capable of and doing to make this world a better place every day. So real quick, 30 seconds. Morgan, you're next to me. I'll just start with you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm on Twitter and TikTok at Morgan Godvin. It's a solid way to get a hold of me.
I'm on LinkedIn, Olga Milman, CUNY RF at Project Impact BMCC. Milman at bmcc.cuny.edu.
Caits Meissner everywhere, but mostly my Twitter and Instagram and et cetera is my art. So be forewarned if you want to connect with me around my work at Penn America. You can get to me at cmeissner@penn.org, or this is easier and it will still get to me, prisonwriting@penn.org.
I am Keri Blah, Keribla on Twitter and TikTok, and I think I have my email in my Twitter bio. So yeah, I'm pretty findable.
Yeah.
Thank you
check
so
out the
much.
American Prison Newspaper stories on JSTOR Daily to see how history repeats itself.
Thank you, Morgan. Well,
Yeah.
we're going to change that. We are changing that, right? Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. I really appreciate the time that you spent with us.
Thank you.